The ships appeared over Manhattan at 6:14 a.m. on a clear July morning. Sunlight already gold on the glass towers, and for exactly 11 minutes nobody on Earth said anything funny about it at all. 43 vessels, each the size of a city block, hung motionless against a sky so blue and cloudless that news anchors would later describe it, without irony, as almost cruelly beautiful. As if the universe had picked the nicest possible morning to deliver the worst possible news. No weapons fired. No demands broadcast. Just an armada, waiting, catching the early sun on hulls the color of wet slate, while every government on the planet scrambled someone toward a phone that had never been designed to ring for this. In Washington, a duty officer 3 months into the job stared at a radar feed and said, out loud, to an empty room, okay, this is real. This is happening. As though saying it twice might make it stop being true. In New York, at UN headquarters, Ambassador Elena Voss was 3 sips into her coffee when the call came, and she did not spill a single drop, which she would later consider, privately, one of the great professional achievements of her career. By 9 a.m., High Marshal Vorik Tichenel stood at the podium of the UN General Assembly Hall, 7.5 feet of armored predator under fluorescent light designed for men half his size, mandibles clicking with the slow, deliberate menace of a species that had never once needed to bluff. 300 human diplomats sat in a silence so total that the room's ventilation system was, for a few surreal seconds, the loudest thing in it. The Kroll Dominion, Vorik said, and his voice, a deep subharmonic rumble, made the podium microphone hum in protest, has surveyed your world for 6 of your months. We have observed your weapons, your cities, your fractured governments. A pause, the particular wrongness of a predator taking its time. And we have observed your food. Elena Voss, seated in the front row, did not visibly react. 31 years of diplomatic training held her face perfectly, professionally still. Continue, High Marshal. 2 substances, Vorik said. A processed meat cylinder served in bread. A fried grain wafer, smothered in melted dairy and spiced vegetable matter. He let it land, for black eyes sweeping the room like he was daring anyone to laugh. You call them hot dogs. You call them nachos. Somewhere in the back row, one diplomat made a short, disbelieving sound before 3 separate hands clamped over 3 separate mouths. The Kroll Dominion demands full production rights, Vorik continued, utterly unbothered. Unlimited export quota, and the original recipes, effective immediately. Compliance ensures peaceful relations with the most powerful war fleet in this sector of known space. Refusal? And here his voice dropped, resonant enough that Elena felt it in the floor through her shoes. Will be considered an act of war. The silence lasted 4 full seconds, long enough for 300 diplomats to understand, all at once, that an alien armada had just threatened to end human civilization over condiments. Before Elena Voss rose, straightened her jacket with one slow, deliberate motion, and said the 4 letters that would end up printed on more t-shirts than any other sentence in human history. No! Vorik's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. For a long moment, the most feared military commander in 3 star systems simply stared down at a 5'4" human woman in a navy blazer trying and failing to locate the part of his 300-year career that had prepared him for this. You understand, he said slowly, what refusal means. I understand precisely what refusal means, High Marshal, Elena said, and her voice did not shake. I also understand that you've just declared the first interstellar war in recorded history over street food, and I would strongly recommend you get comfortable, because this is going to be the strangest week of your life. She had absolutely no idea in that moment how nearly right she was, or how close the real danger would come, not from the fleet above her, but from the people standing directly behind her in her own uniform who were about to decide that being clever was the same thing as being safe. But that came later. For now, she straightened her jacket a second time, turned her back on an armed alien invader as though he were a mildly difficult city councilman, and walked out to go find someone who could tell her, urgently, everything humanity knew about what an alien wanted with a hot dog. 6 blocks from the UN building, on a corner he had worked for 11 years, Dale Okonkwo was having a completely different morning. 2 dogs, everything on him, he said to the construction worker at the front of his usual line, snapping his tongs with the practiced ease of a man who had done this exact motion perhaps 400,000 times. Mustard's fresh. Onions are fresh. World might be ending. My onions are still fresh. You heard about the ships? The construction worker asked, phone already out, thumbs scrolling. Heard about 'em, Dale said, sliding the finished hot dog across the cart with a small flourish. A flick of the wrist that had, over the years, become something close to a signature. Can't do a whole lot about 'em from here. Man's gotta eat regardless. He narrated the next steps under his breath, an old habit from a short-lived cooking show audition 15 years back that had gone nowhere but left the tick behind. Onions caramelizing nice. That's the good color. Don't rush it. The same low mutter he always used, whether anyone was listening or not. He'd run this corner since before half his regulars had graduated high school. Through 2 blizzards, 1 hurricane evacuation he'd personally ignored, a global pandemic that had nearly ended the business twice, and 1 memorable afternoon involving a runaway parade float that had taken out his old umbrella. In Dale's personal, deeply lived-in ranking system, 43 alien warships slotted in somewhere around notable. A full tier below, the day the water main burst and flooded the whole block, and 2 tiers below, the Rangers making the playoffs. His radio, propped against the napkin dispenser the way it had been for a decade, crackled through the emergency broadcast. Something about a demand, something about a diplomatic refusal, something about a visibly rattled UN spokesperson using the phrase, unprecedented act of culinary aggression, with a completely straight face, live on international television. Dale didn't catch most of it. He was too busy with a lunch rush that, against all logic, had somehow tripled by 11 a.m. Because here was the thing nobody at the UN had accounted for in their careful, classified briefings. Word travels fast in New York, faster than any government could contain, and by noon half the city knew exactly what the aliens wanted, exactly what they'd threatened, and exactly what Ambassador Voss had said back. "Yo, Dale," called a regular. A paralegal from the office tower 2 blocks up, grinning as she took her usual nachos, extra jalapenos. "You're basically a national security asset now. You know that, right?" Dale looked down at his cart. The same battered steel box, the same crooked replacement umbrella, the same hand-lettered sign that read "Best Dogs in Midtown." Dale says so. And slowly, for the first time all morning, began to understand that today was not going to be a normal day. "You're telling me the whole reason we might be at war," he said, "is my nachos. Not just yours," she said, "but also, yeah, kind of yours specifically. You're culturally significant now." Dale considered this with the gravity of a man being told his taxes were being audited. "Huh," he said finally, and went back to the grill, muttering, "Significant hot dogs, that's a new one. Gonna need a bigger napkin dispenser if this keeps up." The same low patter, just slightly more bewildered. 4 blocks away, inside a windowless, aggressively beige briefing room 3 floors below the UN building, Ambassador Elena Voss was learning the same absurd truth from a much more official angle and enjoying it considerably less. "Walk me through it again," she said, rubbing her temples. "Because I need to hear it a second time before I believe it. A fleet capable of glassing this entire continent got fixated on street food." Across the table, a Pentagon liaison, young, overcaffeinated, clearly running on 3 days without sleep. Elena said slowly, "That we'd be handing over as part of a good-faith diplomatic exchange. I want to end this war before it starts, Ambassador, using the only leverage we have. This fleet threatened total planetary destruction 2 hours ago. I'm not interested in playing fair with something that isn't planning to." Elena was quiet, the specific, weighing quiet of a woman who had spent 3 decades in rooms exactly like this one, listening to exactly this argument in slightly different uniforms. "General," she said finally, "I understand the fear driving that. I don't dismiss it. But if the very first thing humanity does, the very first time we're offered a genuine off-ramp from a war we did not start, is poison the peace offering, we don't win this. We become the second most dangerous predator in the room, and we lose the only real advantage we have. Which is that right now, we're the only species in this building who hasn't tried to kill anyone yet. I intend to keep it that way as long as I possibly can." She stood, straightened her jacket in one slow motion. "We do this in the open, by the book. Nothing anyone could ever accuse us of hiding. That's not weakness, General. That's the entire point. Hale didn't look convinced. He didn't look angry either, just tired and scared in the specific way of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for threats he could shoot at and had just been handed one he couldn't. He gathered his folder, and as he rose, he said something quiet to the still writing woman beside him. 3 words Elena didn't catch, and would spend the worst night of the following week wishing to God she had. The woman, Colonel Reyes, though Elena wouldn't learn the name until it mattered far too much, nodded once, closed her own notebook, and left the room already at T- something only she was counting. Out in the corridor, she caught up to Hale in 4 strides. Sir, if we're building the capability, I need it built right. And I need it built by someone who won't hesitate at the wrong second. She wasn't asking to lead it. She was informing him she already was. Give me the xenobiology annex and a clean site. I'll have a non-lethal batch calibrated and staged inside 48 hours. If the talking works, we bury it and nobody ever knows it existed. If it doesn't, she checked her watch out of pure habit, the way other people breathe. We don't lose the planet because we were too polite to plan. Hale looked at her a long moment. Reyes had pulled 2 of his people out of a collapsed building in Kandahar by refusing to accept a casualty count she hadn't personally verified. She was the least reckless officer he had ever commanded, which was exactly why he trusted her with the most reckless thing he'd ever authorized. That was the trap, though neither of them could see it yet. Her steadiness wasn't the opposite of the danger. It was the delivery system for it. A hesitant officer would have stalled. Reyes would execute, flawlessly, calmly, on time, the instant her own judgment told her to, and her judgment answered to no one in that building but herself. Non-lethal, Hale said. The spec. And you hold for my word. Only my word. Copy, sir, Reyes said, already walking, already at T-48 and counting. Neither of them said the quiet part, the part that would nearly cost 3 billion people their lives. That hold for my word only works if the person holding can still hear you when the moment comes. By early afternoon, the story had escaped every containment effort the government had attempted. Cable news had produced no fewer than 6 competing graphics packages, most featuring a cartoon hot dog in a tiny military helmet. A hashtag nacho war had overtaken every other topic on every platform within 90 minutes. And on a street corner 6 blocks away, Dale Okonkwo had just run entirely out of hot dog buns for the first time in 11 years of business. The Kroll Dominion's opening offensive began at 1,400 hours with a full tactical descent squad, 12 armored warriors, cutting-edge stealth gear, orders to seize a midtown food distribution facility and secure what High Marshal Vorik's official briefing had termed, with total military seriousness, strategic snack infrastructure for the Dominion. It went poorly almost immediately. Squad leader, came the voice over Cadet Scree's calm, tense and urgent. We have a problem. Report. Squad leader brow snapped, mid-descent. Boots touching down in an alley 2 blocks from Dale's cart. Weapon already sweeping the rooftops for threats that, as it would turn out, were never going to materialize. Scree's voice hesitated, mandibles clicking with audible distress even through the static. I can smell it, squad leader. The primary target substance. I can smell it from here. Focus, cadet. I am focusing, squad leader. I am focusing extremely hard on not. Scree broke formation. It happened fast enough that 3 trained Kroll commandos, veterans of border skirmishes across 2 star systems, simply stood in stunned silence as their youngest squad member sprinted directly toward the smell of grilled onions with the singular focus of a heat-seeking missile. Cadet Scree. That is a desertion-level violation. By the time squad leader Browl caught up, weapon still raised out of pure reflex, Scree was standing at Dale's cart, for black eyes wide with something caught precisely between terror and rapture, staring at a hot dog the way most people look at a newborn child. Dale, for his part, looked up at the 7-foot armored alien now standing at the front of his line and did the only thing 11 years of New York street vending had actually prepared him for. You want mustard on that? He asked, tongs already moving. Or you more of a ketchup guy? Scree made a sound no human throat could replicate, somewhere between a whimper and a war cry, and nodded so fast his mandibles clicked like castanets. By the time the rest of Browl's team arrived, weapons raised for a full tactical extraction of their compromised cadet, They found him sitting cross-legged on the curb, 3 hot dogs deep, counting under his breath, for 5, 6 bites. That's 6 perfect bites, his old cadet training coping habit fully activated. Squad leader Bral stared at the scene for 11 full seconds, then very slowly lowered his weapon. "Is there a line?" he asked finally, voice carrying the particular exhaustion of a man's entire worldview quietly, permanently collapsing. "Or do we just wait our turn?" By nightfall, near-identical reports were arriving from 6 other descent squads across the city, and Second Officer Dralis Vorik's rigid, by-the-book second-in-command, a Kroll who had built his entire 3-decade career on discipline, was standing on the flagship bridge watching his carefully planned invasion dissolve in real time. "Squad 7 has gone dark. High Marshal," Dralis reported, voice tight. Last transmission indicated they had located a facility specializing in something called a loaded nacho platter. "We have not heard from them in 4 hours. "Location of Squad 7, Vorik said, mandibles clicking with barely restrained fury. "They are." Dralis checked the tactical display, and his posture visibly deflated. "They appear to be inside the establishment, High Marshal, sitting in what the surveillance feed describes as a booth." A stealth team assigned to a nacho warehouse in Queens was, by that point, for hours overdue, and was eventually located, all 12 members seated in a wide, contented circle around a shared industrial vat of queso, weapons stacked neatly and entirely forgotten a few feet away, the picture of total, blissful surrender. Vorik received the reports with the particular fury of a commander watching an unbeatable war slip through his fingers for reasons his 300-year doctrine had never accounted for. "This is a disgrace," he snarled. When Scree was finally brought before him aboard the flagship for formal reprimand, still, disturbingly, holding a foil-wrapped hot dog he had somehow smuggled onto a starship in orbit. "You abandoned a combat objective on your first deployment. Do you understand what that means for your record?" "Sir," Scree said, with the total, unshakable sincerity of the truly converted. "Sir, I really think you should try one before you decide exactly how mad you are." Vorik opened his mouth to deliver what would have been, by every account of his career, a career-ending reprimand. He looked at the hot dog. He looked at Scree. He looked, very briefly, at Second Officer Dralis, who was standing rigidly at attention, visibly praying his commander would not do what he was obviously about to do. "1 bite," Vorik said finally, mandibles clicking with what might have been the first genuine uncertainty of his 300-year military career. "For evidentiary purposes only, cadet. This changes nothing about your reprimand." It changed everything about his reprimand. What followed over the next 36 hours would later be studied with considerable academic interest as the single strangest military engagement in recorded human history. There was no combat. There were no casualties. There was, instead, a slow, cascading, almost comedic collapse of an entire invasion force's discipline, documented in real time by a global audience that had, somewhere around hour 6, largely stopped being afraid and started, quite openly, finding the whole thing extremely funny. News drones captured a squad of Kroll commandos politely queuing outside a food truck in Brooklyn, weapons slung over their shoulders like backpacks, several holding numbered tickets. A late-night host built a monologue around an apex predator civilization defeated by a condiment, and the clip became the most-watched segment in the show's history. A children's news program in the UK ran a gentle segment reassuring young viewers the aliens were not here to hurt us, they just really, really like nachos, but not everyone on Earth was laughing. In a repurposed logistics office on the 3rd floor of that same Queens warehouse the One-Dale supplier ran, the 3 separate Kroll squads had now visited without ever noticing the locked room at the back. Colonel Reyes was watching the exact same footage the whole planet was laughing at, and seeing something entirely different. On her monitor, the Taco Tuesday squad, the one the late-night hosts couldn't get enough of, 12 armored aliens packed into a booth like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened, froze on a paused frame. To 3 billion people, it was a punchline. To Reyes, it was a rally point. 12 hostiles, unengaged, holding position in a fixed civilian structure, in a pattern that read, to a mind trained to see patterns, exactly like an occupation force digging in and waiting for a signal. She did not think the aliens were pretending to love nachos. She thought it didn't matter whether they were, because a distracted enemy and a patient enemy leave the same footprint, and only one of those mistakes lets you keep your planet. She turned from the screen to the workbench and spoke into a secure line in mission clock time. "We're at T-40 on batch 1, sir. Calibrated to their neurochemistry per the xenobiology annex. Non-lethal at spec. If the summit fails, we push it into the export supply and the whole fleet is down inside a day." A pause. "Understood. Holding for your go." She was not a villain. She had been handed a doctrine, have a way to win if talking fails, and she was executing it flawlessly, quietly, exactly as a good officer should. The problem, the one nobody in that room could see yet, was that non-lethal at spec and non-lethal in reality are separated by a margin no one had actually tested on a living Kroll. And the second problem was worse. Reyes was building a weapon that ran on a trigger if the summit fails, and she trusted her own read of failure more than she trusted a diplomat's. Aboard the flagship, unaware that a countdown had just started ticking under a city he was trying to make peace with, High Marshal Vorik stood at the observation window, staring down at a planet he had arrived to conquer and was now being quietly, humiliatingly outnegotiated by a hot dog vendor and a 58-year-old woman in a navy blazer. "Status," he said without turning. 11 of 12 deployed squads report full operational compromise. "High Marshal," Dralis said, flat with exhaustion. "The 12th has not made contact in 9 hours. Last known position places them at an establishment offering, and I am reading directly from the transcript. All-you-can-eat Taco Tuesday." Vorik was quiet a long moment, for eyes on the golden evening light spreading across a city that, by every rule of warfare he knew, should have been in ruins. "Prepare a formal communication to Ambassador Voss," he said finally, and something in his voice had shifted, not defeat, but the reluctant beginning of respect. "Request an in-person summit. Unarmed." "High Marshal," Dralis said carefully, "the Dominion Council will interpret an unarmed summit request as—" "I am aware of exactly how the Council will interpret it, Dralis. I would rather explain a summit than explain why an invasion fleet was defeated by a fried grain wafer. Send the request." He did not know, could not know that on the ground below, a human colonel had just heard the word summit, come across an intercept, checked her mission clock, and quietly moved batch 1 from holding to staged. By the third day, what remained of the Kroll invasion force had, by every practical measure, entirely collapsed, not from human resistance, but from what the Dominion's own medical corps was now formally documenting as a fleet-wide morale and discipline crisis of nutritional origin. But collapse on one side didn't mean peace on the other. And Elena Voss was about to learn that the most dangerous person in this entire crisis was not orbiting her planet. He was 2 doors down, and he was terrified, and he had already, without quite meaning to, set something in motion he no longer fully controlled. She found out the way she found out most things, a detail that didn't fit. "Say that number again," she said, standing over a logistics manifest in the beige briefing room, a food safety lawyer beside her mid-sentence. "Export batch prep, Ambassador. Queen's distribution hub. It's flagged for a military quality assurance hold. A military QA hold. On hot dogs." The lawyer shrugged. "That's what the paperwork says." Elena went very still. She had spent 31 years reading rooms for a living, and reading paperwork for longer, and she knew exactly one reason the military would place a quality assurance hold on a civilian food shipment bound for an alien fleet. Because someone wanted control of what went into it. She found General Hale in a stairwell, alone, which told her something before he said a word. Hale was not a man who stood in stairwells unless he wanted to not be found. "Tell me you didn't," she said. Hale didn't insult her by asking what she meant. That was the thing about him, he was scared, not dishonest. "I authorized a contingency," he said. "A capability, not a use. There's a difference, and I need you to hear that difference before you." "There is no difference, General. Once the capability exists and the trigger is a judgment call." Her voice was very quiet. "Who's holding it?" A pause. And in the pause, Elena watched something cross Hale's face that frightened her more than the fleet ever had. The specific expression of a man realizing his own certainty had grown a second head. "Reyes," he said. "Colonel Reyes. She's the best officer I have. She'll hold until I give the word. And if she decides the summit's failing before you do, if an intercept comes in garbled, or Vorik raises his voice, or one of his people does something she reads as a feint." Elena took one slow breath and straightened her jacket. You didn't build a contingency, General. You built a countdown, and you handed the clock to the one person in this building more afraid than you are, and you told her the alarm goes off when she thinks it should. Hale opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time since Elena had met him, the ramrod posture failed just slightly, just at the shoulders, the posture of a man who has just seen the shape of a mistake he cannot yet measure. Call her off, Elena said. Now. It's not that simple. She's running dark for operational security. That was the point. I can reach her at scheduled check-ins. Not between them. He checked his watch and something in his face went gray. Next windows in 6 hours. The summit's in 4. The math landed in the room like a dropped plate. Aboard the flagship, Vorik was fighting a version of the same war, the war against his own side 300 million miles removed and structurally identical. The Dominion Council. Came the transmission, a hologram of Counselor Threx flickering above the central display, older, harder-edged than Vorik. None of the reluctant warmth that had crept into Vorik's own voice these past days. Views this entire operation as an active humiliation of the Dominion's military reputation. 12 squads compromised. 0 casualties inflicted. Do you understand how this reads to every rival power watching our fleet's performance? I understand precisely how it reads, Counselor. I would ask you to understand what actually happened. We encountered a substance our own physiology cannot resist. That is not a failure of my soldiers' discipline. That is a discovery about our own biology the Dominion scientists missed across 6 months of surveillance. Then destroy the substance. Burn the distribution centers. Level the city if necessary. Vorik closed all 4 eyes, the old gesture. Reluctant acceptance of something he didn't want, but when he opened them, his posture had gone very still and very deliberate. Counselor, I have led Dominion forces for 300 years. I have taken worlds by force when force was the only tool available. I am telling you as clearly as I know how, that force is not the correct tool here. This species did not defeat us with weapons. They defeated us by being, without exception, more hospitable than any civilization I have encountered in 3 centuries. I watched 12 elite squads abandon their posts not out of fear, but because a single human street vendor treated an armed invader exactly the same way he treated every other customer in his line. That is not a weakness to exploit, Counselor. That is something I believe the Dominion should study, not destroy. The hologram was silent a long moment. You are requesting I authorize a diplomatic resolution over a military one. I am requesting you trust the judgment of the commander you sent to make exactly this decision. Give me 1 summit. If it fails, I will personally lead whatever response the Council deems necessary. But I do not believe it will fail. Another silence. Then 1 summit, High Marshal. And Vorik, if this becomes a permanent embarrassment, the consequences fall on you personally, not the Council. Understood, Counselor, Vorik said, and closed the transmission and did not know, could not have known, that 400 miles beneath him a human officer had just calibrated a compound to the exact biology he had spent this call defending, and was waiting only for a signal that a nervous mind might mistake for the sound of a summit going wrong. Back on the ground, the 4 hours before the summit became the longest of Elena Voss's career. She did the thing she was best at. She worked the problem from every side at once. She had Hale on every scheduled channel, ready to transmit the abort the instant Reyes's window opened. She had food safety inspectors, real ones, civilian ones, descend on the Queen's warehouse under the entirely true pretext of a routine export audit, hoping a room full of clipboards might slow whatever was staged there. And she did one more thing, the thing that would matter most, though she didn't know it yet. She sent for Dale Okonkwo. You want me? Dale said, standing in a beige room that smelled like burnt coffee and fear, still in his apron, still faintly of onions. At a peace summit. With respect, ma'am, I sell hot dogs. I'm aware of what you sell, Mr. Okonkwo. I've read 4 intelligence assessments that mention your cart by name. Elena almost smiled. Here's what I know. That fleet stopped being an invasion the moment your cadet, and yes, half the internet calls him yours, now sat down on a curb and ate a hot dog instead of following an order. Whatever it is you do, it worked on them when nothing else on Earth did. I have a summit in 4 hours and a very slim margin, and I would like the one human being that fleet already trusts to be standing in that plaza when it happens. Dale was quiet a moment, turning his tongs over in his hands. He'd brought them without thinking, the way some people bring a wallet. You know, he said finally, muttering half to himself, the old habit. My old man used to say you can't reason a scared man out of a corner. You gotta feed him out of it. He looked up. That true for aliens too, you think? Mr. Okonkwo, Elena said, taking one slow breath and straightening her jacket. I am about to bet the entire species on the UN Plaza had never hosted a crowd like this. By the time Ambassador Elena Voss arrived, just after dawn, security teams had cordoned off 3 full blocks, and even so the perimeter was packed reporters, camera crews, ordinary New Yorkers who had simply decided that whatever was about to happen here, they wanted to be able to say they'd seen it. Someone had brought a homemade sign reading, "We stand with Dale's cart." Another read, "Nacho accords or bust." Elena stood at the base of the plaza steps, straightened her jacket, and watched a single shuttle descend from the fleet above, smaller than the warships. Unarmed, exactly as promised, landing with careful precision in the cleared space. High Marshal Vorik Tachanale stepped out alone. No honor guard. No weapons. Just 7.5 feet of armored predator walking across an open plaza in full view of a species he had, for days earlier, threatened with total destruction. And off to one side, unremarkable in a red and white apron, holding a battered set of tongs, stood a hot dog vendor that a small handful of Kroll cadets in the security cordon visibly, helplessly perked up at the sight of. High Marshal, Elena said, when Vorik reached her. Ambassador, Vorik said, mandibles clicking once the Kroll equivalent of a wry, exhausted smile. Your fleet has not fired a single shot in 72 hours. Neither has yours, which I understand was not entirely by design. No, Vorik admitted. It was not. They walked toward the negotiating table, a small, almost comically modest folding table, chosen deliberately over anything grander. And Elena, who was very good at her job, kept exactly one part of her mind on the man across from her and the other part on a clock she could not see, running down in a warehouse in Queens, toward a signal a frightened colonel was still waiting to receive. The summit began well. That was the problem. Because well is a fragile word, and 40 minutes in, it broke not through lice, but through the single most ordinary thing in the universe. A misunderstanding. It happened when Second Officer Dralis, standing rigid at the edge of the shuttle ramp, received a routine fleet status ping and, per 3 decades of protocol, raised his forearm calm and spoke a clipped command burst into it. Nothing sinister. A discipline report. But 400 miles away, an intercept station feeding Colonel Reyes's dark channel caught a Kroll officer at the summit, transmitting an encrypted military command mid-negotiation, and flagged it, automatically, as the exact profile of a faint eye in the warehouse. Reyes read the flag, checked her mission clock, and moved Batch 1 from stage to armed. Elena felt none of this. What she felt was the summit going quietly, terribly right. Vorik leaning toward her proposal, the words regulated trade quota, actually being spoken aloud by a Kroll High Marshal at the exact moment her earpiece, the one tuned to Hale's channel, delivered 4 words in Hale's voice, tight and airless. Elena. Reyes went dark. She's got eyes on you. She's watching the summit feed. She's looking for a reason. Do not give her one. She did not spill her coffee, metaphorically speaking, though every muscle in her body wanted to. She took one slow breath. She straightened her jacket. And in that breath she understood the whole shape of the problem with a clarity that would frighten her later. When she had time to be frightened, she could not reach Reyes. She could not stop the summit without tipping a scared fleet into reading betrayal. She could not send security into a plaza full of cameras without handing the colonel the exact hostile action confirmed she was hunting for. There was precisely one person she could still reach, the human watching a monitor 400 miles away, looking for proof that this was real, and there was precisely one thing on Earth that had ever proven it. Not a word. Not a signature. Picture. The one picture no feint in the universe could fake. She was not going to calm the aliens. She was going to stage the truth on camera for the one frightened soldier who needed to see it, and she was going to do it with the only prop that had ever worked. She turned, calmly, to the hot dog vendor standing 20 feet away. Dale, who did not know about the countdown, looked at her steady but not steady hand, at the specific brightness in a diplomat's eyes that he'd seen 1,000 times across his cart on people holding themselves together over something they wouldn't name, and he did the thing he'd spent 11 years learning to do. He didn't ask. He read her, nodded once, and got to work. What happened next was not luck, though the history books, working only from the footage, would call it that for years. It was the single most deliberate thing Elena Voss ever did. A woman who could not reach the person about to end the world, reaching her the only way left by making, on live television, the one image a countdown cannot survive. Because a countdown, it turns out, needs two things to end a world. It needs a weapon, and it needs someone certain enough to use it. Elena couldn't take away the weapon, so she went after the certainty. And here was the thing Elena had gambled on without being able to say it aloud. She could ask Dale to set up the cart, but she could not make the image happen. Vorik was a high marshal at a negotiating table on live television. Predators do not sit on the ground. The picture she needed, the one no feint could survive, required the one thing no ambassador could order and no doctrine could script. A proud, frightened alien commander choosing, in front of his own fleet and 3 billion strangers, to be undignified. That part wasn't Elena's to do. It was Dale's. He wheeled the cart up beside the folding table, and he did not offer the High Marshal a hot dog, because 11 years had taught him that you never hand a scared, proud man anything from above you get down to where he is first. So Dale Okonkwo, hot dog vendor, sat down. Right there on the UN steps, cross-legged, apron and all, in front of every camera on Earth, and started building a hot dog on his own knee like it was the most natural place in the world to do it, muttering under his breath the whole time, mustard first, always mustard first. Don't let anybody tell you different, not to Vorik, not to the cameras, just the old habit, out loud. The way he'd done it 10,000 mornings when nobody was listening, and Vorik, who had spent 3 days watching his fleet fall to exactly this, who understood at last that the man was not surrendering to him but simply refusing to stand over him, looked at the human sitting on the ground, and understood he was being offered something his entire species had no word for. Not tribute. Not victory. Company. He closed all 4 eyes. And the most feared Warfleet commander in 3 star systems folded 7.5 feet of scarred armor down onto the steps of the United Nations, sat cross-legged beside a hot dog vendor, and let the man hand him lunch. In the warehouse, Colonel Reyes stood over the armed batch, thumb on a hardline trigger, watching the summit feed, waiting for one more indicator to confirm the faint one more sign the Kroll were playing humanity for fools. And what she saw on the monitor was this. Predator Apex Commander sitting on the ground beside a man in an apron. All 4 eyes closed the way his species did only when they surrendered to something, taking a bite of a hot dog built on a stranger's knee. And beside him, one after another, his officers doing the same. Dralis, rigid, formal, ordering a nacho platter with no jalapenos and extra queso and eating it with the exact precision he brought to everything else. Scree, counting bites under his breath. Weeping openly with joy on international television. An entire chain of command, live on every monitor on Earth, laying down their dignity in a plaza in exchange for lunch. Colonel Reyes was a soldier. She had been handed a doctrine, have a way to win if talking fails. She stood there, thumb on the trigger at T- whatever it was, and she looked for the feint she'd been so certain was there. And she could not find it. You cannot fake that. That was the thing no xenobiology annex had accounted for, the thing no doctrine had a line for. An armed feint does not sit down cross-legged and cry over a hot dog in front of 3 billion people. A trap does not close its eyes and surrender to mustard. Whatever Reyes was looking at, it was not a species playing humanity. It was a species that had, genuinely and helplessly, fallen in love with humanity's cooking. Her hand came off the trigger. She stood alone in a warehouse in Queens for a long moment. A highly trained officer who had come within one certainty of poisoning the first piece in interstellar history. And then she did the bravest thing anyone did that entire week, braver than Voss's no, braver than Vorik's summit. She picked up her secure line, and she reported herself. Command, this is Reyes. Stand down, batch 1. Full stand down. Log it. A pause, her voice steady, mission clock cadence finally gone. And log this too. I was wrong. It wasn't a feint. Get somebody up here to take custody of these canisters, because I don't trust myself to be the last person who touches them. 400 miles away. In a plaza full of eating aliens, Elena Voss's earpiece crackled with Hale's voice, wrecked with relief. Barely a whisper, she stood down. Elena. She stood down herself. And Elena Voss, ambassador, 31-year veteran of every hard room humanity had, allowed herself exactly one thing. She closed her eyes for a single second, the way a certain alien did when he accepted something too large to fight, and then she opened them, straightened her jacket, and turned back to the High Marshal to finish making peace. Possibility that it is the rest, by comparison, was easy. "I have a proposal," Elena said, once Vorik had, with enormous dignity, finished a second hot dog. "Not surrender. Not tribute. A trade agreement negotiated, mutual, entirely voluntary. Earth exports a regulated, sustainable supply of processed snack goods to the Dominion, under full trade law with proper compensation. In exchange, your fleet withdraws, and the Dominion formally commits to never again attempting to seize anything from this planet by force." Vorik was quiet, mandibles clicking slowly, doing the arithmetic of a proud commander calculating exactly how thoroughly his species had been defeated by a condiment and finding, to his own surprise, that he didn't entirely mind. "The Dominion Council will not easily accept this as anything but total humiliation," he said. "High Marshal," Elena said, and here, for the first time in 4 days, she allowed herself a genuine smile. "Your cadet is currently sitting on my summit steps, in full view of every camera on this planet, eating his 5th hot dog and crying with joy. I don't think the humiliation ship has entirely sailed. The better question is whether the Dominion would rather be remembered as the fleet that got defeated by a hot dog cart or the fleet that turned it into history's strangest, most enduring trade partnership." Vorik closed all 4 eyes briefly, the old gesture, but when he opened them, there was something almost like relief. "Draft the agreement," he said, "before my entire fleet resigns their commissions and opens food carts of their own. I am told Second Officer Dralis has already inquired, unofficially, about proper hygiene licensing procedures." Somewhere behind him, Dralis made a small, mortified sound several microphones picked up perfectly. The formal signing took place 2 hours later, live on every major broadcast on Earth, the Nacho Accords, as the world had already permanently named them. General Hale watched from the edge of the plaza, arms finally unfolded. When a reporter asked for an official military assessment, he was quiet a long moment. "My professional opinion," he said slowly, "is that I came into this week certain the only safe move was the ruthless one. I built a plan around that certainty. And I want to be very clear on the record. That plan came within a hair of being the worst mistake in human history, and the only reasons it wasn't are a diplomat who refused to be rushed, a soldier braver than me who caught her own hand on the trigger." He paused, "and a man who sells hot dogs, who understood something about scared people that I spent 30 years in uniform not learning." He looked briefly at the sky. "My daughter's going to think this is the coolest thing that ever happened. I'm going to let her keep thinking her dad was one of the good guys in it. She doesn't need to know how close it was. Nobody printed that last part. Elena made sure of it. It was, she felt, the least she could do for a man who had told the truth when he could have told a legend." Word of the deal reached Dale Okonkwo the same way most of the week's biggest news had. Mid-service, from a customer holding up a phone while his tongs were still moving. "They're calling it the Nacho Accords," she said, practically vibrating. "Dale, there's already a plaque going up outside the UN. It's got your cart on it." Dale looked at his cart, the same battered steel box, the same crooked umbrella, the same hand-lettered sign, and looked at the line now stretching around the block. Human regulars, 3 politely waiting Kroll cadets, and near the back, Second Officer Dralis himself, looking deeply uncertain about proper queue etiquette but determined to figure it out. "Well," Dale said, snapping his tongs once, the old habit slipping out under his breath, "gotta feed 'em. That's the whole job. Somebody's gotta feed everybody." Before looking up at the nearest Kroll customer, who was practically vibrating, with anticipation everything on it, the cadet nodded so fast his mandibles clicked like a snare drum. 6 months later, Dale's cart had a permanent security detail, not because anyone genuinely thought he needed protecting, but because the Dominion's trade delegation had insisted on it as a condition of the Accord's first renewal, much to Dale's ongoing, deeply amused disbelief. "You know," he said one afternoon to High Marshal Vorik, who now visited personally every few weeks under the polite diplomatic fiction of trade oversight that fooled absolutely no one. "When this all started, I figured you were here for something that made sense. Water, minerals, something a smart species actually needs. The Dominion has encountered water-rich worlds before," Vorik said gravely, accepting his usual extra jalapenos, a habit his own medical corps still could not explain and had, at this point, stopped trying to. We have never before encountered this. The Dominion Council, for the record, had made its own peace with the outcome in the time-honored fashion of powerful bodies everywhere, by claiming they'd planned it. Councillor Threx's official history now described the entire affair as a strategic economic annexation of a critical resource world through non-kinetic means. A phrase Vorik had read aloud to Elena over the cart one afternoon in a flat monotone until she'd laughed so hard she'd had to sit down on the steps. The same council that had ordered him to burn the city now cited the accords in recruitment material. Threx had personally accepted a commendation for visionary first contact doctrine. Vorik had let him keep it. A commander learns which battles are worth the fight, and whether a proud man got to pretend the surrender was his idea all along was not, it turned out, one Vorik cared to win. Nearby, Scree, now a full squad leader, following what the Dominion's record diplomatically termed exceptional first contact adjacent service, waved cheerfully from across the plaza, 3 hot dogs deep already, counting under his breath, the old habit. Never quite gone, just softened into something closer to pure enjoyment than anxious coping. Second Officer Dralis, standing a respectful distance behind Vorik, had finally, after months of quiet observation, worked up the nerve to order for himself. A modest, carefully considered nacho platter, no jalapenos extra queso, which he ate with the same rigid precision he brought to everything else, and which Dale privately found the funniest thing he'd witnessed in 11 years of running this cart. Colonel Reyes came by sometimes too. Off-duty, out of uniform, quiet. She'd been cleared, Elena had gone to the wall for her, arguing to a very closed hearing that the officer who stops herself is worth 10 who never have to, and that the person you most want holding a trigger is the one who proved she'll take her own hand off it. Reyes never ordered much. A single hot dog, plain. She'd eat it standing at the edge of the plaza, watching the aliens she'd nearly poisoned laugh with the humans who'd nearly let her, and once, only once, Dale caught her eye and gave her a small nod, the nod of one person who'd been in a corner to another, and she nodded back, and neither of them ever said a word about it, and that was exactly how she wanted it. General Hale visited in civilian clothes and always paid and always tipped too much and always, Dale noticed, stood a little closer to Reyes than a former commanding officer needed to. The protectiveness of a man who knew precisely what he'd asked of her and precisely how close it had come, across the sector, unbeknownst to any of them. 3 other species scout vessels had quietly begun altering course toward Earth, and this time the intercepted transmissions they were traveling on the strength of weren't threat assessments. They were the footage. A Predator commander sitting cross-legged on the ground beside a man in an apron. An entire chain of command laying down its dignity for lunch and looking, for the first time, in anyone's records, happy. Word had gotten out across the sector, and it wasn't this world can be taken. It was stranger and far more dangerous to the old way of doing things. This is the one world in known space where the most feared fleet alive went to be conquered and stayed to be fed. They weren't coming to invade. They were coming in the oldest impulse in the galaxy because they'd heard there was somewhere you could go to be welcomed, and they wanted to find out if it was true. Elena Voss watched the plaza from the steps with the specific, hard-won satisfaction of someone who had personally prevented the first true interstellar war in recorded human history, and who knew, in a way she would carry privately for the rest of her career, exactly how close it had come to being prevented by no one at all. She had learned something that week she hadn't expected to learn this late in her life. That the most dangerous moment isn't when the enemy is at the gate. It's the moment your own side decides that being clever is the same thing as being safe. Vorik had nearly lost his peace to a council that wanted a war for its pride. She had nearly lost hers to a good man who wanted a war for his fear. The miracle wasn't that 2 species made peace. The miracle was that both of them survived their own hardliners long enough to do it. Dale, she called over, watching the line stretch further than it ever had. I think we're going to need a bigger cart. Dale looked at the growing crowd, human regulars, familiar Kroll faces, and near the back, one very confused-looking new arrival in unfamiliar violet armor, clearly just off a ship, sniffing the air with an expression of dawning, helpless, unmistakable hope that he looked at his cart. The same battered steel box, though repainted twice now by well-meaning volunteers. The same crooked umbrella, though replaced 3 times. The same hand-lettered sign, though it now had a small brass plaque bolted beside it that read, simply,